It's time to go into some more detail for the tanking classes that are available in Mists of Pandaria, so you can get a better idea of how well each will do and where they excel. Mists of Pandaria is of course infamously the expansion where for once, it wasn't unrealistic to see tanks being top of the damage meters given certain circumstances. This was thanks to a passive effect that all tanks have called Vengeance, where in short, when you take damage, you do more damage in return, and on harder hitting bosses this effect will really stack up. Blizzard have also already made some notable buffs to Vengeance on the Mists of Pandaria beta, since the 5.4 version that we were set to launch with is much weaker than how this effect would have been originally, so this is a win for whatever tanking class you're most interested in playing. Overall though, tanks remain as ever a very important role within all areas of content, so picking the right one will matter. For each tank I'll be talking about the following points. How are they in the early raid tiers during Mists of Pandaria? How is their scaling? Do they get worse? Do they remain consistent? Or do they get a lot better? Their complexity, so is the spec easy to play or a bit more difficult? Whether the spec will be stacked at all, their utility, so their personal cooldowns or what they bring for the raid. And just to note, I won't be talking about PvP for tanks here. This will also be rated off a 5-star system where 1 is poor, 2 below average, 3 average, 4 above average and 5 excellent. So with that said, let's check out the tanks of Mists of Pandaria and see how well each one will perform. Warrior should expect to start Mists of Pandaria as a tank that has strong offensive capabilities as well as mobility, however is somewhat lacking on the, well, being tanky side of tanking, which is, you know, quite important too. Whilst other tanks are capable of creating consistently massive shields or applying self-heals, more often than not the Warrior will be a bit more reliant on their healers. They are expected to do fine early on into Mists of Pandaria due to this, but I doubt they'll be the most popular pick for most raid groups. Their scaling is also known to be strong, and we can see plenty of logs from back in the day where players were on the same balance patch that we will be on, and warriors are absolutely blasting on damage. Again, in Mists of Pandaria, it's not uncommon for your tank to be doing a bunch of damage on your raid team, rather than just being more of a supportive role. Difficulty-wise, the warrior's main concerns may be feeling a bit underwhelming in lower levels of gear, and as though there isn't really much that you can do to control your incoming damage when compared to other tanks. That being said, it's fairly straightforward to just keep your main damage dealing abilities on cooldown and plan around when defensives are required at certain points throughout the fight. Stacking wise, if you have a warrior tank, obviously it's going to be a one-off. In fact, there really isn't an ideal setup this expansion where you should often expect to see 2 of the same tank. I don't think there is a single spec which is so far above any other tank that any raid would seriously consider this, and that's definitely a good thing. In terms of utility, most of the good things that the prot warrior can offer in terms of stuns or interrupts and banners could also just be brought by an arms warrior, which means prot warrior either has to be really good defensively or offensively to justify its raid spot. On the offense side of things, I think that they are good enough and they should definitely improve as the expansion progresses, but compared to other picks they won't be as good early game. Protection also has crazy good mobility for a tank, which is always great for things such as ag control. Because of protection being generally weaker early and having good utility, prot warrior should more often expect to fulfill the off-tank role in Mists of Pandaria until they can start stacking up gear later in the game and perhaps graduate to main tank. Overall, I think prot is just a bit off what I'd say will be one of the meta picks for MOP, but due to their strong damage and utility, I think higher end guilds will find more use for them on average. Druid's brand new tanking spec is Guardian, and it follows a similar kind of pattern to the Warrior. It's another tank where it's expected to have a slow start to the expansion, on average taking more damage than other tanks due to a lack of stats. Their active mitigation tool, Savage Defense, is also quite RNG heavy in that it just gives you a bunch of dodge chance, and sometimes the numbers just don't go your way and you're going to be getting hit a bunch, although on average it should be effective. Guardian should also feel more reliant on their healers than other tanks as well because of this, and whilst Guardian won't be all that great early on, what they do have going for them is scaling, because this spec scales like an absolute beast into later game raids. Again, checking some logs from back in the day, you can see a whole lot of Guardian Druid representation from the top guilds. Difficulty wise, Guardian on a base level when main tanking is pretty straightforward to play, with lots of procs happening, using your active mitigation correctly, and keeping your debuffs active and spells on cooldown. And when it comes to utility, Guardian really isn't offering a ton that any other Druid spec couldn't already do, to be honest. Because of this, Guardian really wants to have that main tank role within your raid, but but as we've already talked about, they're not going to be doing too well at that straight out of the gates of Mists of Pandaria in the opening raids. And on top of that, the off-tank spot is much better filled by, well, to be honest, almost any other tank really. We know Guardian has huge potential come later raids in the expansion, but I don't think they'll see a ton of play early on into Mists of Pandaria. This may be a tank that you pick up midway through the expansion if they do scale as well as expected, and once Siege of Orgrimmar goes on the PTR and you can gear up for free and really test them, I think that'll be the moment when we see if they are as good as we think they'll be. Overall, I'd expect more Guardian Druids towards the end of Mists of Pandaria than the start, and though they don't appear to be that strong early, they definitely finish in a very powerful spot. Next up, let's talk Blood DK. So the Blood Death Knight was just way overpowered during the whole of Cataclysm. In fact, in the last 2 weeks of logs for Dragon's Soul for tanks, there are more people playing Blood DK than every other tank spec combined. Heading on into MOP, Blood remains a very strong and flexible pick, but now they definitely have more competition than they did before. The Blood DK is expected to start the expansion as a powerful tank, with their key strengths being in their single target damage output and their massive toolkit of self-heals and cooldowns. The scaling on the Blood Death Knight should also be above average, and as they gain more gear, they get more resources, which can add up to a lot more damage and self-healing for them. Throughout the whole expansion, Blood DK should be more than capable of holding their own, making them a very consistent pick, with abilities and cooldowns such as Death Strike, Vampiric Blood, Rune Tap, Dancing Rune Weapon and tons more. Blood DK always feels as though it has something to press and a way to live through just about anything. You know, the way Blizzard designed the Blood DK, even back in Wrath of the Lich King, was 2 expansions ahead of any other tank. They were in charge of their health pool and their cooldowns, whilst other tanks were just still getting hit in the face. It's just nowadays, the other tanks have also started to embrace this active mitigation playstyle and have closed the gap to a large degree. Nevertheless, I've always found Blood super fun to play because it feels as though you just have so much control over your own health bar. Complexity wise, I'd say things are fairly straightforward here, with the main challenge simply coming from the amount of different cooldowns that you can press when you're in danger, but improving on that front will simply come with practice. All DKs have great utility in Mists of Pandaria, mainly through talents such as Anti-Magic Zone and Gorfien's Grasp. But on top of this, it's also important to note that the Blood DK can work fine as a main tank or an off tank here as well. As a main tank, they're going to be doing tons of damage thanks to their Vengeance stacking up more, and they can take better advantage of Death Strike healing and their Mastery Shield. As an off tank, their damage remains respectable, and they offer the same good DK utility, albeit DK DPS specs could offer the same here. Overall, Blood DK is a super flexible pick for MOP. It works well in both tanking roles, and you can always respec to Unholy if a fight really only demands one tank, and it's just a spec which should always be in a strong place. Brewmaster starts off in a really strong spot at the start of Mists of Pandaria and is a highly mobile tank that packs a ton of self-sustain and absorbs. Their main mitigation tool is Stagger. This causes some physical damage to be taken instantly and some as a damage over time effect, and their mastery improves this. Brewmaster has good damage on both single target and especially AoE, and should certainly be a popular pick during its opening expansion. It's also expected to scale well as gear improves, giving them a bunch more stats, which makes both their damage and mitigation more effective. Really, there shouldn't be a moment where Brewmaster feels as though it's a weak pick during Mists of Pandaria. Difficulty-wise, Brewmaster has a few different things that are all happening at the same time. You'll need to be managing your stagger stacks, keeping abilities on cooldown, being aware when big damage is incoming so you can use your defensives, and positioning correctly too. I think Monk in general is quite an involved class for a new one, and because of that I'd say they're a bit more complicated than your average tank. The Brewmaster Monk utility is largely things that can be brought by other Monk specs. So similar to Guardian Druid, this puts them in a place where ideally they want to be the main tank. And early on into Mists of Pandaria, fortunately, I think Brewmaster could very well be one of, if not the most popular main tank specs, and they should very much be playable in this role throughout the whole expansion. Though in later raid tiers, as we have already talked about, there's definitely more competition as different specs start to get better. Overall, Brewmaster should be a safe pick for a tank, especially main tank this expansion, with them remaining a great pick from the start to the very end of MOP. And finally, we have the Protection Paladin. This is going to be another pick that starts off slow at the beginning of the expansion, but gains a ton of power as time progresses. Prot Pala should start off in MOP as another tank that will be on average taking more damage than some other picks, especially if you try and put them in the main tank off-tank role. Their main concern is really getting enough haste to where they can have respectable uptime on their active mitigation, which is Shield of the Righteous, and the bottleneck here is just how fast they can generate holy power to spend on this ability, and in lower levels of gear, you're just not getting a ton of holy power. Thankfully, as we reach later raid tiers, Prot Pala will start to gain enough stats to truly be effective, and by the time you're gearing up through Throne of Thunder, they should be in a much better place as a whole. Beyond that, in Siege of Orgrimmar, they keep improving, and by the end of the expansion are providing themselves with a massive amount of damage mitigation and self-healing, making them a great long-term pick for Mists of Pandaria. In terms of complexity, baseline, it's just generate holy power and spend it to make sure you're reducing your damage taken, but paladins have always just had a lot of optional buttons between your basic rotation, your cooldowns, your mitigation, and so on, and this is where the Prot Pala really excels on the utility side of things. Not only do they have that good standard paladin toolkit of hands and blessings for the raid, but they can also offer a decent amount of damage mitigation and heals to the main tank even when they're not actively tanking themselves. This puts the protection paladin in arguably the top spot for the off-tank role this expansion. Prot Pally should be a pick which I think sees more play as time goes on, but it should always be a solid consideration for the off-tank role. I don't see much Prot Paladin main tanking early on into the expansion, but given their scaling, they should definitely feel better to play either way by the time we hit Throne of Thunder and beyond. And those are all the tank specs for Mists of Pandaria, with just a few extra details on how they should do over the course of this expansion. As always, things are subject to change here, so treat this as a guideline for what to expect. Let me know your thoughts on what I've gone over here in the comments down below, and as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.